Part 1 of World War II is going to be the beginnings of World War II, how it started, and then America's entrance, because we are really going to try to make an effort to stay out of this, okay? So, the first subtopic is setting the stage for a second World War, okay? Now, I'm going to give you a few facts about this as we go. Keep in mind that no war in world history covered as much of the earth as World War II did, okay? No war in world history covered as much of the earth, then or now. No war in history covered as much of the earth. No war in a history of this world cost as many lives as World War II. No war in world history cost as many lives as World War II. And no war in world history caused as much total destruction as World War II. So, again, if we set the stage for the Second World War, we understand that no war in history covered as much of the earth, no war in history cost as many lives, and no war in history caused as much total destruction as World War II. Before World War II would end, more than 50 different nations would take part in the conflict. Before World War II would end, more than 50 nations would take part in this conflict. Obviously, you had two sides to the war. The good guys, according to history, were the Allies. And they joined together to fight against the bad guys, which were known as the Axis. So in World War II, you had the Allies versus the Axis. And I think they're both on your ID sheet. Who were the major Axis powers? There were other countries involved, obviously, because there were more than 50. But the major Axis powers were Germany, Italy, and Japan. Germany, Italy, and Japan made up the major Axis powers. Who were the major powers among the Allies in World War II? The United States, Great Britain, and who else? Ironically. Russia. Russia. Okay? The United States, Great Britain, and Russia. Now, I will back Emily to a point that some people would say France. The trouble with France was they got overtaken very early before we got involved. They had already succumbed to Axis and mainly Germany. So they really were not a major power. We were bailing them out. Okay? Now, because of this vast distance between the conflicts, World War II actually was fought in two different wars. You could actually say it was two wars. You had a war in Europe, and you had a war in the Pacific Ocean. Okay, so actually, World War II was two separate wars. There was a war fought in Europe, and there was a war fought in the Pacific Ocean. Now let's kind of concentrate on the war in Europe, because there were actually three major fronts in the war in Europe, and fronts are areas of battle. So there are actually three major fronts in Europe during World War II in which they fought. And you've probably heard of these. The first was the Eastern Front. They were fighting in the Eastern Front of Europe in World War II. And in that front of the war, the Soviet Union was fighting against forces of Germany, Bulgaria, Finland, Hungary, and Romania. So again, the war in Europe consisted of three major fronts. The first was the Eastern Front. And in that front, you had the Soviet Union on the Allied side fighting the Axis countries of Germany, Bulgaria, Finland, Hungary, and Romania. That was the Eastern Front. The Soviet Union against Germany, Bulgaria, Finland, Hungary, and Romania. The second front in Europe was the Southern Front. The Southern Front. And the Southern Front was basically North Africa and Italy. That's where they were fighting. The geographic location was North Africa and Italy. And in North Africa and in Italy, on the Southern Front, for the Allies, you had the United States, Great Britain, and Australia against the Germans and Italians. So on the Southern Front, which was fought in North Africa and Italy, you had the Allied powers of the United States, Great Britain, and Australia fighting against Germans and Italians. And the third front in Europe that was fought during World War II was the Western Front. And this is where we're going to get talking about what Emily had brought up with the French. On the Western Front, it really wasn't anybody against anybody. Really what happened is Germany simply invaded Europe across the English Channel, attacking both Great Britain and France. So it was a defensive part on the part of Great Britain and France. It wasn't head-to-head. So what you had on the Western Front was Germany's invasion of Europe across the English Channel against the British and the French. So that was the European theater of the war. Three fronts: Eastern Front, Southern Front, and Western Front. The other part of the war took place in the Pacific, also known as the Pacific Theater of World War II. Yes, Emily, right here?
How could Germany afford to fight all three places?
They had, well, we'll get into that, but they had an incredibly massive army developed. That was their focus under Adolf Hitler. Yeah, it's a good question. Now, who was fighting in the Pacific Theater? For the Allies, you had United States, Great Britain, Australia, and New Zealand. And who were they fighting against in the Pacific Theater? Come on.
Germany.
Japan. Japan. So in the Pacific Theater, which is actually another complete war, you had the United States, Great Britain, Australia, and New Zealand fighting against the country of Japan, in which the fighting stretched over 5,000 miles in the Pacific. It was just wide open. Okay? So, you actually have two theaters of World War II. You have the European theater, which consisted of the Eastern Front, Southern Front, and Western Front. And then you had the Pacific theater, which caused fighting against the Axis and Allied powers over a 5,000-mile radius. That is a summary of World War II. Okay? Which will take us to our next subtopic then, which is a question. The three main causes of World War II. Why did we have a Second World War? What were the three main causes? What were the three main causes of World War II? Anybody want to guess what might be? What happens usually? Go ahead, Montina.
Isn't it like Germany was mad and didn't pay all this?
You're very close. We call it problems following World War I. And you're giving me some examples, and we'll talk about those. So the first main cause of World War II were problems following World War I. And Kellyanna hit it right on the nose if you heard her. The Germans felt cheated over the treaty following World War I. They felt they were forced to disarm past reason after World War I. And they felt like they took full responsibility for World War I. So they were mad. Okay? Problems following World War I. The Germans, who were main factors in World War II, felt cheated over the treaty following World War I. They felt they were forced to disarm past reason following World War I. And they felt like they took full responsibility for World War I when they didn't think it was their responsibility. What happens after a war? What takes over a country after a war? The I word. Inflation. And inflation went rampant in Germany after World War I. And when you have inflation, it leads to unemployment. And unemployment leads to starving to death. So the picture was so bleak in Germany after World War I. They felt cheated over the treaty. They felt they had to disarm past reason. They felt that they took full responsibility for it. After it was over, inflation took over. Germans were unemployed. They were starving to death. So what is the result of this situation? The only way we're going to fix our problems following World War I is to what? Fight World War II to get these things back. So that was the first main cause of World War II, were problems following World War I. And Kellyanne was exactly right. It all surrounded Germany. And they're feeling they were cheated after World War I on the treaty. They were forced to disarm past reason. They had to take full responsibility for it. Inflation came in and took over the country. Unemployment led to people starving to death. And they felt the only way out of our situation is to try to get it back through another war. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, the second main cause of World War II was the rise of dictatorships across the world. The rise of dictatorships across the world. Now, at this time in history, the rise of dictatorships had an enormous impact on the beginning of World War II. Okay? There were a group of totalitarian rulers after World War I, and President Roosevelt had to deal with these totalitarian rulers. And a totalitarian ruler is someone that is a dictator, that exercises total control over a nation and suppresses individual freedoms. That's what a dictator is. And what type of rule does a dictator promote? A totalitarian rule. So again, the rise of dictatorships had an enormous impact on the beginning of World War II. And as the years passed, President Roosevelt had to deal with a number of totalitarian rulers or dictators in which they exercise total control over a nation. They suppress individual freedom and they make all the rules. Now, the four most powerful dictators came from the four most powerful countries across the globe other than the United States. So who all of a sudden had dictators? Italy, Russia, even though they were part of the Allies, they had a dictator. Germany, Adolf Hitler, and Japan. Now, Japan's dictator was a little bit different. It wasn't really one person, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So the four most powerful dictators came from the most powerful countries across the globe. The most powerful country in the world was the only one that did not have a dictator when you kind of ranked them. Okay, so the second reason we had a World War II, rise of dictatorships across the world. The third reason that we had a World War II was greed for land by those dictators. Greed for land by those dictators. Now let's break these dictators up. Who was the dictator of Germany? Adolf Hitler. I'll tell you a little bit about him, not a lot, a little bit. We'll kind of tell you a little bit about him. But he was actually born in Austria. He was Austrian born. He was a fanatic. And he climbed to power in Germany way back in 1933. So Adolf Hitler was Austrian born. He was just an unbelievable fanatic. And he had made his way up the ladder and climbed to power in Germany and was leader of Germany way back as far as 1933. And he was a ruthless dictator. He longed for the conquest of Europe. Areas he was especially interested in was Northern Africa, Poland, and Russia. So he was a dictator that was ruthless. He had a tremendous hunger for land, and the hot spots that he wanted to secure for Germany and Europe. Well, he actually wanted all of Europe, to be honest with you, but he really wanted North Africa, Poland, and Russia. Okay? And to get those, he's going to have to pretty much take all of Europe. That's the idea. Anybody know who the dictator of Italy was? Benito Mussolini. And he actually seized power in Italy way back in 1922. 1922. Benito Mussolini, dictator of Italy, seized power in Italy in 1922. He was a little bit different than Hitler. He was kind of swaggery. What does that mean if you're swaggery? You got a little sauce to you. I mean, you got a little swagger. You kind of got a little bit of style, okay? But he was a domineering ruler, and his dream was to control the Mediterranean Sea. That's what he wanted. He was a swaggering, domineering ruler, and he wanted to control the Mediterranean Sea and the Middle East. That's what he wanted. The Mediterranean Sea, land or surrounding the Mediterranean Sea, and the Middle East. And then he was very willing to take any property in Europe that Germany was not interested in. Okay? So, Mussolini is the dictator of Italy. He assumes power in 1922. He's kind of a swaggering, domineering ruler. He dreams of controlling the Mediterranean Sea, the Middle East, and he'll take any land that Germany does not want in Europe. Who was the communist leader, dictator of Russia, who actually is on our side at this time? Joseph Stalin. And he came to power in Russia in the 1920s as well. Very powerful dictator. Not a nice man, but at least he was on the side of the Allies during this conflict. Now, he wasn't so greedy for land, but what did he want to spread throughout the world? Communism. Very good. So you got to have some land to do that, but he wasn't near as land greedy as Mussolini and Hitler, but his goal in life was to spread communism throughout the world, not just Europe. Anybody know who the dictator leader of Japan was? Hideki Tojo, right? But the thing about him, he was more of a figurehead. You know who really was the dictator of Japan? Their military. Their military controlled the country. He was a kind of a figurehead, but Tojo was the general. But the people that dictated to the people of Japan were the military. Now, they wanted control of the Far East and control of as much land and islands they could get in the Pacific. That's what Japan wanted. The Far East and as much land as possible they could accumulate of islands in the Pacific. And the most prominent of the military leaders of Japan was General Hideki Tojo, and he led the military force that really controlled Japan. They were really the dictator. As Paris said, they had an emperor, but he was more of a figurehead than anything else. The military controlled the country. Okay, any questions on that? Okay, well, let's talk about the start of World War II and the fall of France. That's why France wasn't considered a major power fighting the war, because they're going to be conquered. The start of World War II and the fall of France. Anybody know what action Hitler took to start World War II? Anybody know that from world history? He invaded Poland, and he did that at dawn on September 1st, 1939. At dawn on September 1st, 1939, German dictator Adolf Hitler and German forces invaded nearby Poland.
What was that date?
September 1st, 1939. Now, Hitler's forces were carrying on what they called a blitzkrieg in Poland. A blitzkrieg. Anybody know what a blitzkrieg is?
It's his battle strategy.
It is, but what is it? It's also known, what's that? Lightning war. What does that mean? I mean, we're in there, go, 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 go. We're not messing around. So, at dawn on September 1st, 1939, German dictator Adolf Hitler orders a blitzkrieg. and his German forces start a lightning war in Poland, which is simply kick butt and take names. No prisoners. Well, who's pretty nearby that needs to mobilize their army to protect themselves from an invasion by Germany? France. So as soon as the Blitzkrieg begins in Poland, nearby France mobilizes their army to try to protect themselves from an invasion by German forces. Now, France wasn't the only one upset with the aggressive behavior of Hitler, so was Great Britain. So after German forces invaded Poland on September 1st, 1939, both Great Britain and France declared war on Germany. So immediately after Hitler's Blitzkrieg and his invasion of Poland on September 1st, 1939, France mobilized to protect themselves, and France and Germany immediately declared war on Germany. Now, there was a chain of forts that guarded the French eastern border between France and Germany. It was known as the Montina Line. And it was a chain of forts that guarded the eastern border between France and Germany. And the French, after watching what Hitler did in Poland, begin to brace themselves for an attack which they believe is going to come against the Montina Line, which again is a chain of forts that protect the French eastern border from Germany. Well, Hitler and his German forces waited. They did not attack right away. So the French is sitting there pretty cocky. Oh, they can put it on Poland, but they better not cross the Montina Line. We're ready for this Blitzkrieg. Well, Hitler doesn't come and doesn't come and doesn't come, and the French start joking.